get to our side of the things here. Here's a story from kind of my neck of the woods. From the CBC News, a staggering 80,000 people and more were homeless in Ontario last year, new report finds. AMO says the groundbreaking report is believed to be the most accurate province-wide picture to date. So this is part of a survey they do every year, calculating the amount of people that are obviously homeless, that so they can figure out city services and whatnot. And it looks like here, just in Ontario alone, that number is continuing to increase. And here's what the CBC released. That they did this video here on why there's such a staggering number of people. And this is not just, people like to say it's all drug addicts. They're not all drug addicts. These are people that have been disfranchised and discouraged, and a lot of them are families and kids that just are struggling to get by. Obviously, cost of living is increasing and inflation and housing crisis. But here's the story.
A study released today is highlighting the depth of homelessness in Ontario. It shows more than 80,000 people were known to be homeless in 2024, and it predicts the situation is on track to get worse. That is, unless governments start to make some major investments. The CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick has been following this for us. And so, Megan, what does this report by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario show?
Well, that key number that's jumping out from it, Andrew, is that it found about 80,000 people in the province last year experienced homelessness. And they say that's a 25% increase since 2022. They also say that of that number, about half were experiencing chronic homelessness. So homelessness for an extended period of time or perhaps repeated periods of time. And they're saying this is just the known number to them. It's the minimum number, they're saying, of people that were experiencing homelessness last year. It's sometimes a hard statistic to capture. So this is what they've been able to determine in their study. And they are predicting that this is on track to get worse unless there's major interventions and quickly. One of their other findings is that without intervention, homelessness could more than triple by 2035. That would mean almost 300,000 people in Ontario experiencing homelessness. And there's also some findings in this report in terms of who is homeless and where. The report finding that children and young people accounted for 25% of that 80,000 number, and also that Indigenous people in the province represented about 45% of those experiencing chronic homelessness in communities in Northern Ontario. It also showed that the rate of homelessness was growing really quickly in northern communities and in rural communities, and that presents a number of challenges, the report says. In rural areas, for example, there wouldn't be as many emergency shelters, for example, or transitional housing, and then sometimes people have to leave and travel to bigger centers to find the kind of support that they need. Now, the AMO is saying that these statistics in this report are shocking, they're staggering, and that they cannot and should not be ignored.
So, Megan, what does the study call for in terms of solutions?
Yeah, the AMO is saying that they're doing the best they can, that municipalities are bearing the brunt of this, and they're spending a lot of money, they say, on shelters, for example, and other supports. And they're saying this is not a sustainable situation fiscally for municipalities to keep trying to cope this way. They're saying that some of the responses by higher levels of government, the province and the federal government, that those responses are failing. And while investments have been made by the province recently, they say they are insufficient and just nowhere near what's needed to end homelessness in this province. And they actually put a dollar figure on it, Andrew. They say $11 billion needs to be spent over the next decade to tackle this problem. And they say that they're trying to convince the government that there's a good return on investment in terms of spending money to try and end homelessness. Take a listen.
We also know from other research that without this investment, taxpayers will end up paying much more through our shelters, hospitals, police budgets, in addition to the human suffering. These are investments our communities need, and it is time for the provincial government to adopt this approach that prioritizes long-term housing solutions so that we can solve this crisis together.
So some of that $11 billion, Andrew, would be spent on long-term solutions. That is something they were emphasizing. Shelters are meant to be for emergencies and for short periods of time. What they're saying is there needs to be investment in transitional housing, in supportive housing, in community housing. The report says Ontario doesn't, it's not only that Ontario doesn't have enough housing, it doesn't have the right mix of housing, the report is saying. And then also calling for further investment in mental health and addiction support, for example. So they are calling on the province here at Queen's Park, on Premier Doug Ford and his government to make this a priority. They're saying there needs to be way more urgency in tackling this issue. And we've heard some response from the opposition parties today in response to this report as well, saying these statistics show a failure on Doug Ford and his government's part, and that they need to get their priorities straight and start making more investments to end this crisis.
So that was the CBC doing a bit of a dive on this. By the way, AMO, I just did a quick research on this because I forgot what it stood for. So that is the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. And it's a non-profit organization representing municipal and regional governments in the Canadian province of Ontario. So it's kind of like a governmental board of all the communities across Ontario. And obviously, homelessness, being here in Ontario, like it's no stranger to us to understand that there is a homelessness epidemic. There has been a crisis within the crisis within a crisis on foot. And hearing some of the numbers, like they said by 2035, it's all going to increase if we don't take measures seriously. And I feel like that is the problem with a lot of this. And you look at all these different communities. You look at Toronto, you look at anywhere in Ontario, anywhere in even the country. There's all these initiatives to put in place low-income housing, to put in place helping the homeless. But in the end, it doesn't get the same result because there's usually some sort of corrupted henchmen in between the practices of support, of putting aside money for the homeless and actually putting measures and action in place to actually do so. And we see this a lot. We've seen, for example, in California, the people responsible for the homeless initiative are getting financial kickbacks for the more homeless that they keep on the streets instead of actually helping these people. So there's a bit of shady corruption in the homelessness outcry and the outreach for these people. And it's not really going into affirmative actions to, build more houses, to build low-income housing. You've seen so many promises of low-income housing developments that are supposed to help alleviate this plan and bring people into shelter, but nothing ever really gets taken place. None of the projects that they keep promising actually work out and actually make a significant difference. So this is the article that came with that video there, and it says more than 80,000 people in Ontario were homeless last year. A new report from the province's municipality show in what is the clearest picture of the issue to date. And nearly half of those people have lived in either shelters or on the streets for more than 6 months or experienced recurrent homelessness over the past 3 years, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario found in its report examining the human and financial costs of the province's homelessness crisis. The association, which represents 444 municipalities across Ontario, said a fundamental different approach is needed to tackle the crisis, one that prioritizes long-term housing solutions rather than temporary measures or policing solutions. That's exactly the point. Is the most that they're putting forward when it comes to combating the homelessness on the street, the most I'm seeing is just more police officers. And police officers can only go to a certain extent. And what are they going to do? They're just going to push them away out of public parks, out of the streets, whatever. And they're just going to go somewhere else. It's not actually solving anything. It's not combating the issue. It's not actually resorting to a measure that would actually alleviate the homelessness crisis. You're just moving away out of a certain location, so it's out of sight and out of mind. And policing's not helping that. These temporary measures aren't helping with that. We saw during COVID that hotels were trying to bring in homeless people from the street, and that was only a temporary measure. Then they got kicked out again. So we need to implement real solutions to this. The province recently announced a further $50 million for affordable housing and an additional $20 million for shelter funding. While the money is welcome, it's nowhere near enough to solve the crisis, Robin Jones said. The province announced a fundamental shift last summer in how it approaches the opioid crisis, which affects the homeless population disproportionately. It will soon require 10 supervised consumption sites to stop operating by the end of March because of their proximity to schools and daycares. Ontario will move instead to an abstinence-based treatment model with the launch of a new homeless and addiction recovery treatment hubs, 9 of which were previously supervised consumption sites, by April 1st. It also aims to create 375 highly supportive housing units at the cost of $378 million. Municipal Affairs and Housing Minister Paul Calandra, Calandra's office, said Ontario has made the largest investment in affordable housing in the province's history. Mayors have asked for us for the helping in managing this complex issue, and that is why over the next 3 years, we're investing a record $3 billion in affordable housing, anti-homelessness, and emergency shelter supports, said Emma Testian, Calandra's spokesperson. The association previously found that there were 1,400 encampments across the province in 2023. There were more than 268,000 households on waiting lists for affordable homes with an average wait time of 5 years, the report said. For some, they can wait up to 20 years. So this all seems like a domino effect. That why we're seeing an increasing amount of people on the streets, why there's such a homelessness epidemic. It seems to be a continuous domino effect where policies of investment and budgeting get away from the city services and communities that they could invest in stuff like this, go towards the fundamentals of, going towards war budgets. They're sending more off to Ukraine. They're sending more off to Israel. They're sending off to NATO, and not really investing into communities that would actually address this issue. And one of the things that they don't address here that should be kind of part of this picture is also bringing back the notion of asylums, mental facilities where people can have shelter. They have a sanctuary where they can receive treatment. And some people say, well, that's kind of barbaric. That's kind of crazy. You've heard all those stories about asylums going nutso with its CIA counterparts doing experiments on them. I understand that. And that's definitely a no. That's definitely something I would extremely fight against. But you need to have an institution available to people that they can have a safe place. They're away from the general public. It makes the streets safer. It makes them safer because you have shelter in place. You have the ability to feed them and also manage some sort of treatment so that people that have mental disabilities, that people that have issues or they have, or they're prone to alcoholism or drug abuse, have those systems in place so they can become better people. And we've seen stories beforehand of different towns implementing the same strategies that I just mentioned here and seeing a huge success. So why isn't that being done in a place like Ontario? We seem to have the resources. We seem to have the capabilities. It would be a good investment because then you'll be creating jobs in that process. You'll have to create construction jobs for people to build those facilities. And then you need nurses and doctors. You're going to hire them and people to run and maintain that mental asylum facility. So all the way around, it seems like a smart investment. But the problem with it is there's even a huge and even bigger business proponent in keeping the homelessness out on the street. Instead of actually addressing this issue, they want to capitalize the issue. And that's the big picture of this, is that there's a lot of groups out there that are in the lines of treating homeless people and helping the needs of these people, but they don't go the measure of actually decreasing the homeless population because there's a business incentive to it. That's why places like California, that's why New York, they don't really fundamentally engage in initiatives that would actually decrease the homeless population by building low-income housing, by building mental facilities that and treating people. They don't do that because there's such a huge business component that capitalizes off the homelessness continuing on the streets. And you're not just talking about mentally insane people. You're not just talking about drug abusers. I know that's kind of the stereotypical rhetoric that, oh, all these people are on the streets because they do drugs. That's not the case. In fact, there's a huge population of the homeless that are living on the streets of Canada that are fully employed. They have jobs. But the reason they're employed is because there's a housing crisis, because it's unaffordable to maintain a living stature in Canada. It's impossible for younger people to put a down payment on a house more than their grandparents' age, more than their great grandparents' age. It's more hard for those people to rent an apartment if you're only one income. It's harder for them to do all this measure. And that's why there's an increasing factor to this. It's on top of the cost of living, on top of the cost of food, on top of the cost of just maintaining oneself. And a lot of people that are working, that are fully employed or even partially employed, aren't able to maintain that ability to have shelter. And some of them live in their cars. Some of them live just in the streets. They're part of the tent cities that we see time and time again. So I'm glad that they're at least addressing this. I'm glad that, because obviously these skyrocketing numbers are just going to get worse and worse. They're already predicting that it's going to be 300,000 by 2030. That's problematic. That is the moment that should be a red flag and spread across all the mainstream outlets. Like, this is a red flag to tell you that Canada's in a crisis. It's going downhill. It's going to hit rock bottom if we don't shape up and do something. And considering the fact that we just don't have any dire need of investing into our own people, investing into our communities, so that we can make measures better, affordable, and readily available for people in need, and rather waste our money on places like Ukraine and Israel or our own government for their own selfish purposes, Justin Trudeau's vacation fund. This is what's causing all this. And just a continuous domino effect that in order that you're doing all this corruption, it's going to disproportionately kick down someone on the lower end of the economic spectrum, which are usually people that end up homeless. And this even goes into, obviously, the food bank statistic that over 2 million people a month are lining up at food banks. 2 million people a month. So this is a country in dire need. This is a country that needs basically a wake-up call and really put into action initiatives that should have been done years ago in order to combat this crisis. Because if we continue to just prologue this and let it be and just drag this on as far as it goes, it's only going to get worse. And it's going to affect more people. It's going to affect more families. There's more children that are homeless than ever before. And nothing good comes out of this. So let's do something at some point and get together. Like I said, bring back mental asylums. We can have a conversation about that. We can have a conversation on effectiveness of that. But you have a shelter in place that could house these people, feed these people, and get them the stability that they desperately need so they can interact with the general society. I see no problem with that.